It is a Rail Natter. Good evening, everyone. We're doing it. It's exciting. Yeah, Rail Natter. I'm already having my own editor shouting in my ear saying, "Get on with it. Stop making the start so janky and concentrate." I would, but I have ADHD. So it's Rail Natter, and very excitingly in the green room, which is actually not a green room. It's an incredibly fetching sort of back. There's a kind of a I don't know what you call it, like a very fetching screen, kind of Art Deco screen behind our guest, and our guest is extremely exciting. It's Victoria Scott. My arch nemesis Victoria Scott has joined us. The wonderful, the erudite, the incisive Victoria Scott is joining us, and we're going to be talking about cars. Things like this, in fact, cars of this nature, the ones that can definitely drive themselves, the ones that are just like a Karen Lexus with a camera sellotape to the top. I think that was how you described it, Victoria, actually.
Yeah, it's a mom spec Lexus. Also, thanks for having me.
No, it's an absolute joy and a delight. Yes, we'll be doing that. Before we get into the episode, of course, this is only here because of the wonderful Patreon supporters and the fact that you enable all of these to happen. So thank you. If you want to find out more about that, patreon.com/Gareth Dennis. Without further ado, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. And as the Intercity 225 fades away, Victoria, the fact that you're on here now, we'll there's a bit of news which we'll start off with, which people might not be surprised. Well, the brief bit of news is pertinent to what we're going to be talking about, because we just had a story from yesterday from Zoe Kleinman, who's kind of adjacent to the pod. I've convinced her about Hyperloop being rubbish, and she had to concede that I was right on that one, which is nice.
Doing God's work.
Exactly right. But she did a story here saying that UK driverless cars are coming in 2027, which is like the regulated date that we're supposed to be having them magically appear out of thin air. But the Uber's kind of boss guy is saying, no, we're ready now, and it's a story that we've heard so many times, that you've seen so many times, and we're going to pick through this. But before we pick through this, we have to, Victoria, we have to say who you are. For the one or two people listening to this who don't know who you are, we must bring you up. Victoria, thank you so much for joining us on the pod. Victoria Scott is here. Yeah, so I say, for anyone who doesn't know, the in joke perhaps that is my arch nemesis, Victoria and I kind of compete for like most guest appearances on Well, There's Your Problem podcast. And Victoria, I think
his name, it's 7.
Yeah, and because me co-hosting doesn't count, as the joke that Roz kept making is that, after the run of me co-hosting, it's like, well, we not had Gareth on it for ages as a guest. So yeah, but I think we're like absolutely neck and neck, and so that's good fun. It's nice to have a nemesis. Every now and then people drop the "let them fight" meme on like
yes,
on
yeah, and I think that we should, like, for charity at some point, we should organize like a boxing match, just have like an exhibition thing, like Tyson versus Paul.
That would be
sort
quite
of deal where it's like, this is a sad mockery of a honorable sport.
Exactly, and given potential future media projects that you may be involved with, I don't want to spoil anything that might happen in the future. Maybe it's two sides of the ring, the two media projects competing. Who knows? It maybe
Horseshoe theory for trains.
Yeah. God, exactly. Yeah. Oh my goodness. No, Victoria Scott, automotive journalist, author, photographer. Victoria, briefly introduce. I've said words, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
I've been an automotive journalist for like 4.5 years full time. I've been sort of transit adjacent for a lot of that, so I've done a lot of other transport reporting. A lot of it's around sort of future tech stuff. And a lot of engineering stories. That a lot of my specialty tends to be like, here's how this kind of thing works. So I apologize for the noise in the background. They are apparently. Can you hear that?
The listener, it's very, very quiet, and the listeners love it. Cool. The authentic, the plumbers are in type situation.
Yeah, they're cutting into the tile in my bathtub currently. But yeah, so I've worked for a variety of like full-time outlets. I've had full-time stints at Motor One and The Drive, and I did a lot of like new car reviews. I've covered aviation, the train industry, Hyperloop, self-driving cars, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of a brief overview. I've written 2 books. The most recent is called We Deserve This, and it's a trans femme automotive lookbook. sort of a fashion
It
book
is.
with a car theme.
It's lovely. We'll come
Thank you.
back. We'll circle back around to We Deserve This because it's gorgeous and has a train on the front cover as well as. Is it an MR2 that is on the front?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's a 97 imported from Japan.
So this is the thing that people may not. The deep cut of the. Well, it's not a deep cut. The lore of me is that I'm kind of a petrol head as well as being like strongly against car dependence in cars, which is funny because that's kind of like also, I dare say you fit a bit somewhat into that camp as well. Like somebody who cares deeply about cars, but like doesn't want our entire society to be necessarily defined by like them being the dominant species on the planet rather than us.
No, especially like in America, it's kind of like required you own a car in most places. And I moved from places where that was true to Seattle within the past couple of years, and so I don't own a car currently. I still love them. I still love driving, but I use our extremely good for America bus system, King County Metro.
Okay.
And then Sound Transit, which has the Link Light Rail and like the regional trains and stuff, as well as some of the like connecting buses. And it's solid. Like I'd like it to be better, and I think that there's ways that American transit agencies could do better. But I mean, really, I don't miss commuting. I don't miss driving to a job. I don't miss sitting in traffic. It's like when I get a car and go drive, it's like a pleasure cruise, or I'm going out hiking or something, or I'm going off-roading or whatever. So
yeah, very very similar to me. And I suppose I drive a 2015 Fiat Panda, by the way, in red. That's my 1.2 Fiat Panda, which me, my wife, and daughter all fit in, and we squeeze our way around the country, and it's delightful. Except we don't get very far because my daughter doesn't sleep in the car, which means we have about a range of about 1 hour drive before we have to come back for nap time. Anyway, I digress. So Victoria, so that profile is perfect because there are so many things that we absolutely overlap on: the tech, the interface between like the tech industry, the transport industry, and the mess that makes. It's perfect. So I've been very excited. I've been wanting to get you on for ages and have just been extremely disorganized and failed to get you on. So I'm so excited that it's now finally happening. So, but we must make our faces smaller because we are here indeed to ask a series of questions that I think will hopefully string a narrative together. And we start with a little bit of history, which is we're here to talk about driverless cars. We're here to explain why driverless cars are pointless, and indeed why my view is that they will functionally never exist, actually. But we have to talk about how long has this whole shebang been going on for? So I've got a picture of the Firebird here, which admittedly absolutely goes hard. I mean, visually, this is one of the most awesome things that we have physically created in terms of how it looks. How it drives, I'm imagining, would be a completely different situation, frankly. But it looks cool as hell. And so the history. So where do we start? So jumping from this sexy picture to a slightly more realistic view of some of the early driverless car tests, it was usually like some large pins hammered into the tarmac, or cables in the road. So tell us a little bit about maybe how far back it goes, and a little bit about what that story has looked like.
They've had ideas about integrating cars with infrastructure design since like the peak of the interstate highway system, when we started deciding that cars are going to be how you get everywhere in America. I forget exactly what this was called, but that's like late 50s. And the hype for it has been there since the beginning of like automation. And the problem is that it turns out it is very difficult to make somebody drive a car. The first, for me, I would say like the era in which you could seriously discuss self-driving as a thing that you could even approach is when LiDAR became, an acceptable technology. Not acceptable, like affordable, integratable technology.
Yeah, like the right balance
of scale and
price
that you could put it into a car. And that didn't happen until the 90s with Mitsubishi. And even then, that was like extremely rudimentary. But people have wanted it since the dawn of the automobile era.
Yeah, quite early. You get the story. One of my previous rail narratives where I put up like Renderite then versus Renderite now. It was like back then. It was like the Renderite was when everything looked like a Roadrunner cartoon, and that you had the cars that were little pods and then people were like playing chess, and the car would move you around. It's like that already exists. It's a train. You can get on them now. Anyway, or get a taxi. But anyway, so this stuff. So we've got these humorous black and white pictures of like the steering wheel-less car. Fine. We have to talk about the Debonair.
There's the Debonair. That was the first car that had LiDAR integrated in it. So I'm literally just going to cite my own article I wrote. There was a story for Motor One about sort of the technology underpinning. Sorry. I swear
Sorry,
every time I
James.
start,
It's fine.
I
Don't worry
swear
about
every time we start talking,
it.
he starts drilling into the top. So there's a story from Motor One about the technology stack that kind of underpins how vehicle sensing works. And this is the '92 Mitsubishi Debonair. It had a lidar system, and it was basically for automatic cruise control.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It basically would just tell the driver like, hey, you should slow down, or like you should turn off cruise control, you're coming up on a car, and it would turn off overdrive. So
Okay,
it would
yeah, yeah.
start engine braking if you were like
Yep.
coming up on an obstacle, but it couldn't use the brakes, and it was not the same kind of, sort of, even like automatic cruise control systems we've got today. But this is sort of where, if you wanted to say like, oh, like an early like level 1, level 2-ish system, like there it is, then that's '92. So it
Yeah, yeah.
predates my
So,
birth.
and we'll talk about levels because I've talked about levels of grades of automation with relation to public transport before, but it'll be interesting to see how they compare to the levels of automation for it because it's a pertinent thing. We'll get there in a minute. Two things on this. Firstly, that's a car.
Yes.
That's a car. Secondly, it's interesting because driverless cars, as I say, I don't believe they'll ever functionally exist, but the technology. The technology for lane assist and for like don't bump into the car in front with your cruise control, which is now kind of becoming more standard, although as part of the making every car completely unaffordable story. But like that's now included as standard, and so it's funny that it dates back to the this it's viably being used in the '90s.
Well, and the first lane keep assist was Mitsubishi also in '95.
Oh,
and
interesting.
that was actually visual processing, so that's camera based.
Ah,
And you'll hear a lot
okay.
about this sort of through the decades, is sort of camera systems versus lidar systems
Yep.
versus radar systems, and really a lot of the sort of major players have leaned towards a blend of them. But
Yeah.
nowadays I think a Kia Soul comes with lane keep assist standard.
Yeah,
And those
yeah.
are like $20,000. It's like the cheapest car you can buy.
Yeah,
here.
yeah. So even that
Well,
tech is
car, it's an
well.
SUV.
This, I suppose, where the photogrammetry tech, where it's just a camera, is cheap. Like you're not having radar and lidar, right? That's
that's very
serious
cheap,
cost-effective tech. Yeah. And then a story that we have put up on a RailNet in the past, which is pertinent to this whole story, and why we're talking about this now is this story that you did back in 2022, which is self-driving cars. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
It was originally a Reuters scoop. I'm also just going to pull it up because I want to make sure I've got the text of what I wrote in front of me. But it was a Reuters scoop, I'm pretty sure. And the CEO of Cruise, so General Motors kind of had their internal, they bought a startup and used it as sort of their test bed for self-driving tech, and it was called Cruise. And their CEO was like, we have always been using remote human oversight for our like self-driving taxi fleet, and I don't see a point where we'll ever be able to wean off of it entirely. And there's this is not just Cruise has since gone under. GM decided they would sort of cut bait on that after spending $10 billion over the course of the decade on it.
Staggering.
Largely because they didn't think the economics were there. That's a whole other story. But this is, even as the tech has matured, this has kind of been the perennial problem. Like, in this story that Reuters did, this was late 21. There was a Waymo supervisor who said that he was disengaging the cars 30 times a day to basically remotely, RDP into a Waymo, take it over, drive it through traffic. Presumably they've improved that number since then, but there's really no good hard data around it aside from
very
when somebody will actually like go to a reporter and say, hey, guess what I've been doing lately. But this was early. This is early in Cruise's life. And let me see, I'm trying to see what else I had said in this story. Yeah. Okay. The only other kicker in here is Cruise was losing $5 million a day shortly before GM pulled the plug on it. So, not a super profitable thing.
And this comes back to a thing that's a recurring question I have, which is true for any tech. Like you talked about all the other stuff. This is the question to ask any of the tech, any of the overlap where the tech industry is trying to get involved in something practical, whether it's health, transport, whatever. What problem is it solving? And in this case, the problem it's solving is the solvency of the automotive industry, in the sense that it's helping to make it insolvent. Like it's helping to dissolve large elements of help to sink a lot of cash of the automotive industry in this junk. It's quite spectacular. $5 million a day. Yeah, just for
Well,
what
and it's
purpose? And yeah, it's just
a
yeah,
lot of it is like, you can it's just another thing that you can rent out without having to actually
yeah,
pay a person, right?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
and that was, I think, kind of the promise of it. And the fact that that GM got out of it meant that they just didn't think it was going to
yeah.
mature enough to the point that they could do it.
And it's worth.
Waymo obviously thinks differently because like they're currently working. Also, I do need to correct myself. Apparently, Waymo doesn't use Cruise was using, I think, remote operators. Waymo at the time was still using people in the driver's
In the
seat. They've
driver's seat,
since
yeah, okay.
graduated from
They've
that, and they've got
flipped into the
yeah.
remote.
This still causes problems. I don't know if you've seen the videos of Waymos sitting in a parking lot all bunched together.
Yeah, it's a fun one. That's a fun one. It's the sort of
Yeah.
thing. If I was clever, I'd have put the video here again, James.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, no, it's but yeah, the thing about the remote driver is that you can put them in the Philippines, or in So once again, we're sending our labor to the global south, where unions and wage fairness doesn't exist, which is nice. So, and the other point that I want to say is, so this is the story of the driverless car. While I pop my face down here, the story of driverless cars is often kind of punctuated by Elon Musk's latest promise about self-driving cars, right? And it's it just goes on and on and on and on and on, which kind of comes back to this point that I wanted to dig in with you, Victoria, which is reality versus hype. Like, we've got the hype. Of all the hype masters, Musk is probably one of the most successful, but rabbit ears around the word successful there. But the actual reality, what does it look like? Where are we sat with the actual reality?
Well, so this story here is specifically from Erin Marquis, who is a wonderful person and also works for Jalopnik. And she went and did the extremely difficult work of cataloging all of the times that Musk
Yeah,
said, like, we are 10 seconds away from full self-driving. And I mean, to Tesla still makes claims of this today. There's active NHTSA investigations about like their accuracy in advertising and the safety of their autopilot full self-driving systems. FSD beta, I believe, is the technical term for it. But the earliest time that he was talking about this was 2013. So that would be, I think the Model 3 didn't. Yeah, the Model 3 wouldn't come out for another 3 years after that. 3-4 years, I think.
yeah.
2017 or so. This is very early on, and I believe it took until 2015 for them to actually roll out the thing that they called autopilot.
Yeah.
Which was, and this is kind of perennially what it's been since then, which is some sort of SAE level 2 plus, which is not a real thing, but that's how they advertise it, like an SAE level 2 plus solution, which is hands-free. Theoretically, you don't need to actually do anything or intervene, but you still need to have your eyes on the road, and if the car crashes, it's legally your fault as the driver.
How convenient.
That's a big one that's worth remembering.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think it's worth saying, like, related to this, so related to that hype cycle is really the question. This is where I really will let you cook, which is the tech side of it, and what the big question of this episode, really, which is what you think on the practicalities of whether they will ever meaningfully exist. And that's not just, the key thing is, it's not just, lots of people say, you hear in the industry, and it comes back, it's like, well, the technology is absolutely there, but people will never be ready for it, and the insurance companies will never be ready. And it's like, yeah, but that's reality as well. That you have to think, it's not just the tech, but also the tech won't ever deliver what you say it will either, by the way. Or will it?
Well,
that's where I hand over to you, Victoria. So say, will they ever exist? And also you can talk about this Benz as well.
Yeah, so Mercedes has the Drive Pilot, BMW has I forget what they call it, but it's their internal name for like level 3 automation. And level 3 is interesting in that it's still a system that it does not advertise that it can drive for you. You still have to, you cannot read a book, right? Like, you should still be ready to intervene in the system at any point. But Drive Pilot specifically is if you're in a, highway marked area in relatively good weather and you're in a traffic jam below 40 miles an hour, the car will handle driving for you. And it will tell you, like, hey, you've got to take over, but there's still an expectation that you've got a little bit of time. If you're kind of like, filing your nails or whatever, it's not like the car is going to explode. You've got time to actually re-engage with it. And so this is, Mercedes and BMW have both done this in Germany. Honda actually had a level 3 car they released in Japan. And I believe Mercedes had this on like a beta basis in California and Nevada. A lot of the difficulty about kind of releasing this on roads in the US is, again, the legal situation, which is
Yeah.
why, if you look at Super Cruise or Blue Cruise or Autopilot or any of these things that, American automakers offer, Super Cruise is GM's, Blue Cruise is Ford's, Autopilot is Tesla's. They're all like level 2+ systems because the legal responsibility still lies with the driver during operation. And it's not, it can say like, hey, I'm going to crash into a barrier, take over right now. Which is incidentally how Super Cruise handles a situation it's not
Oh my
comfortable
God.
with.
Well,
Having
it
tested
screams at
GM
you.
products.
Amazing.
Oh
Okay.
my God, no, seriously, it's like level 2+ system. You're on the freeway and you're kind of like hands off, just sort of sitting there, and then all of a sudden, everything chimes, seat vibrates, take over right now, or I will kill you. Which is kind of like doesn't really make it the relaxing.
Yeah, I was going to say what that's doing
of,
is giving the car to you so that you kill yourself in the car. There's the YouTube algorithm loving me saying that. That's good fun. But yeah, that's the insurance people and the regulations say that it's your responsibility to drive underneath the back of this semi.
Yeah. And so level 3 is an attempt to kind of like automate the most boring, tedious parts of driving, which is sitting in traffic or whatever.
Yep.
And that is on a limited basis available in some places, and it is like relatively attainable, and it is like, from what I've seen, safe. I know people who worked in the Mercedes system.
Yep.
And it did seem like it was well implemented, and they were legally very careful with it because they're aware that if it goes wrong, it could lead to really serious legal consequences for the automaker, because they're creating the software and selling it as hey, the car is now legally responsible for itself while you're sitting back. So that's kind of the reality of it. And like, I think the next one is where we talked about.
Yes, so that's the bends, and the next thing I want to talk about is the tech itself. Yeah, a bit about that.
Yeah, the variety of sensors is sort of like, some of them are going to be just camera based. Like Musk is a really big proponent of like just camera based system. And I think there's some radar in there. I can't remember exactly. They change the tech stack in their cars semi-frequently. So it's like never been the same. Musk is a very big proponent that like we'll get there with just cameras. But like, Waymo uses LiDAR, which is a spinny thing. It's a light, basically it maps the nearby environment using reflected light. And then there's a very large tech stack of like what is required to make this work in a way where even at 40 miles an hour in broad daylight, you're relatively confident that like you're not going to encounter an edge case where the car is just going to run into something.
Panic. Yeah, pedestrians, other humans, things of this nature.
And if you've ever driven a car that's got like overzealous or underzealous pedestrian detection, you're aware that can actually be pretty hard, because distinguishing between a garbage can, part of the reason that like lane detection works so well is it's just basic contrast mapping, which is a very simple technical solution. It's like, look for a line, and that's your line. And like, if you can see a line, you can center yourself in the lane. Of detecting what a garbage can is versus a person, versus which way a person is walking.
Yeah.
And like, if it's going to intersect with the path of the car, that's very challenging. And it's something that human beings do incredibly well. And it's just really hard to make a computer do quickly. One of the things this illustration is from that story I did for Motor One. And one of the stats that kind of blew me away when I wrote it down, because it seemed like it wasn't right. Mercedes-Benz's Drive Pilot, the level 3 system, generates 34 gigabytes of data per minute in operation.
What?
Estimates have basically said that 4,000 gig a day is a pretty good idea of how much data a self-driving car will generate. And of course, like, getting through that amount of data is just incredibly challenging. And this is kind of where you start seeing like a lot of AI people start to slide in, like, oh, we can just get rid of all of this extra data, and we just can we can figure things out, sort of based off of machine learning or whatever. And I'm not a big proponent of that. So it still leaves you with the requirement of, I have to get through 34 gigs of data a minute at like literally blink of the eye reflexes constantly. And that's to drive a car 35 miles an hour in a traffic jam in sunlight.
Yeah. It feels like a very good use of the extremely limited battery power that cars will have.
No, if every car on Earth were self-driving, it would use 4 orders of magnitude more computing power than all of Facebook's data centers put together.
Incredible.
It would require more electricity than Argentina. the country.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's,
Yeah.
computationally and power wise, you kind of run into some constraints
Yeah,
that are
and
pretty quickly.
we'll get there. We will get there because oh boy. Um, so then we get so like in our story of hype versus reality, we get to we see Waymo, and here we've got the Zeekr version of Waymo's kind of tech. This is their latest, I think, right, or
Yeah,
possibly
that's a
even
Gen
imminent.
6. I'm just double checking to make
Yeah,
sure I'm
yeah, I
right,
think
and I
this is the
believe it
Gen
is Gen
Six. Yeah,
6.
yeah.
Yes,
So I suppose
it's a Geely. I always forget how to pronounce it.
oh,
It's a Chinese automaker.
oh yeah, okay, yeah. And so this is where so we know what level 2 is. I guess level 1 is just lane assist, is it? Stuff like that.
Level 0 is like automatic emergency braking. The car intervenes to maybe help you avoid a car accident, but it's not actually doing anything. Level 1 is lane centering or adaptive cruise, and then level 2 is lane centering and adaptive cruise. So the car is like actively handling both steering and brake. That's all level 2 is, and like that's how. Yeah, there's the chart for it. And so like every system that you've interacted with, most likely, unless you're a very rare person who owns a 7 Series in California and like or a S class and opted into like Drive Pilot or something, you've driven a level 2 car. There is no level 2 plus according to SAE. Level
Yeah,
2 plus is just like, hey, you
it's
can remove
branding.
your hands because I'm really good at doing lane centering and braking, but
Yeah,
that's it. That's all the car is actually promising you it can do, and the legal like burden is still on the driver. Level 3 is SAE puts as a traffic jam chauffeur, which is
yeah,
what Drive Pilot is.
yep.
And then level 4 is Waymo. Level 4 is what Cruise was trying to attain, which was the car can drive itself in limited situations. Waymo just started driving on freeways in LA. So, for the longest time, they wouldn't even go on highways because they didn't want to be in like
Really?
high speed situations. Yeah, they were mostly like surface street operation. Um, and they've reached a point now where I think the new Zeekrs may not have wheels in them, but they had safety chauffeurs, as I referred to
Yeah,
earlier, for
yeah.
quite a
So they have
while.
the wheel, but it's in the global south, like
Well,
essentially.
and that was Cruises. Waymo's actually had the person sitting in the
Yeah,
driver's seat. Uber also had an interesting case of this. It was, I think, 2018. Uber had somebody in the car physically with it who was supposed to be monitoring the car, and there was a case where the car hit and killed somebody. And the driver didn't see them because they were kind of like not paying close
yeah, yeah,
attention
yeah.
because the car was supposedly
Yeah, this
self-driving.
is yeah.
That person actually got charged with negligent
Oh
homicide.
my goodness! Right, this is
Uber, I
to
don't think had anything happen to them.
catch this moment, which is like this moment to just say one of the inherent behavioral things here, as like from a railway perspective and a safety perspective, I've designed safe systems to work, and ergonomics is a really important way to think about safe systems of work. And a way, the reason why a lot of this stuff is a real problem and really raises a lot of safety red flags for me is having someone have to suddenly instantly get situational awareness, whether you're the driver, whether you're the owner, it's your own vehicle and you've had some form of you've had level 3 activated, or you've had level 2 activated for a bit, and you're suddenly expected to be tuning
Mhm.
in, whatever it is. Like to suddenly go, oh, I need to suddenly have situational awareness is not it's not a good way to have a safty response when seconds, you've got seconds at play before something bad
No,
happens.
no,
Um,
and this was this was 2019 was when the case actually reached the courts,
mhm.
and yeah, in the level 3 case with Uber, they were like the person who's supposed to be handling this, who was I think the driver was on their phone. Um, it was their fault. Uber's not at fault, and so that's still kind of like well, this is supposed to be level 3. The car is supposed to be handling
Yeah,
things. And it's like
absolutely.
no, actually.
Yeah, and then obviously you throw the worker under the bus in that situation, and yeah, it's not great. So
Yeah, and that's your unpaid gig driver basically.
yeah, exactly. And so yeah, so that coming back to the Waymo, I suppose that's so the Waymo, the Gen 6, as it were, the Generation 6 is it has a remote operator now, so it's not the original Waymo where
I
you've got the
think so.
driver that's a remote operator who obviously they always talk down the remote operator. They never give any data about how many remote operators. How many times remote operators are stepping in? They don't give. They're very They often just don't mention the fact there is an external driver at all in any of their press stuff. I don't know to what extent.
So what Waymo does is they have in at least the iPaces, so that was the Gen 5 car.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
had somebody that they called I've got their site up because I want to get the wording correct. They called it fleet response, which was the car encounters a situation it is scared of, and basically dials into somebody and says, "Help me get through this."
Yeah.
And so they weren't actually remotely handling control of the car over to somebody. The person was basically like training the computer on board how to get through a scenario that was difficult. I don't know what they're doing with the Gen 6 ones because these like just came out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the thing
But
is there
yeah,
was
they
always
refused to
yeah.
drive remotely fully because there was no way to get the network connection
Oh
good enough
really?
to do so.
Okay,
That
yeah.
was the thing with Waymo is they were like, absolutely not. Yes.
Because we cannot rely on the signal to not. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Okay, so in which case, so having gone through the practicalities of, I suppose, did we answer the question? Will they ever exist? I suppose with the Waymo picture up, do you think we're going to be in a situation where we actually have cars that are? I
You can take what is a theoretically driverless taxi ride in certain cities in the US that are notably very sunny, and on specific streets they'll avoid routing that they consider to be too challenging. But I mean, yes, there isn't a person there. Now, is there any reason to do this beyond the hope that the tech progresses further? Absolutely not, because they are dumping billions of dollars into this tech and they are not anywhere near profitable.
yeah
So, and that's the other thing too, is that like I don't know what it is for the Gen 6 cars, but about 4 years ago, the CEO of Waymo said they were spending about $180,000 per car. And this is when they had the Pacificas, which were like the previous gen, and the I-Paces. And so that's like all of your sensors, and that's the car itself, but that's still a ton of money. That you're really, one of the things that Uber had figured out is that by sort of making taxi driving a gig economy thing, they didn't have to worry about paying their drivers living wages, obviously, but they also didn't have to worry about maintaining a fleet of cars, which
yeah
you still have to do with, like, the cars still depreciate, they still have to be
yeah.
maintained. They still need to, like, they're still going to accumulate wear and tear as
And
like
they're now
drunk people
full of
clamber in and out.
they're now full of tech which is instantly obsolete. Uh,
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing with Waymo, is that like you can tell that their cars, because they've invested heavily in like a combination of sensors, which is, I think, the correct way to pursue this. There's a lot of money kind of sitting glued to those cars, and they
yeah.
not really useful as a ton else once you've done that.
This is it. So like
Um,
even if you believe that the tech could go further, which I don't. I think it will. I think it's dead ended at the ideal road conditions and nothing scary, and it will not ever go beyond that because it's a quantum leap of complexity to manage that data and actually start making those difficult decisions. I just don't think
well,
it's practical. But
and
even if
even
you accept
still,
that it is, financially is it likely to continue to survive as a potential avenue of technological investment? I'm not convinced by that either.
yeah, okay, this was 4 days ago. I wanted to make sure I wanted to make
Mm,
sure that I actually saw this went through. But 4 days ago, Waymo had to recall 1,200 cars because they would sometimes crash into things for the hell of it.
yeah,
Like, specifically, it would just drive into a gate or a pole or like chains or whatever, because it would just misinterpret them. And this is kind of your best case scenario that says that they acknowledge 16 collisions between 2022 and 2024 happened due to this programming flaw. And this is low speed driving with limited cities that get a
yeah,
lot of sun, with cars that are, and these are the more expensive cars. These new Zeekr based vehicles have fewer sensors on them. So in an attempt, because the thing is like Waymo's whole thing was, okay, if we keep investing in this for long enough, eventually economies of scale are going to kick in, right? And then lidar sensors are going to cost like $10 instead of several thousand. And of course, that really hasn't happened. Partially because economies of scale haven't taken effect, because
yeah.
nobody's really committed fully to this,
Yes,
and
yeah,
also partially because like sometimes things just don't, like, sometimes you run into the material realities of the world, which is that manufacturing things just costs money because it takes resources.
yeah.
um and so
Sometimes
it's
it's
a
not just
combination
a
of those.
yeah,
it's
exactly. Yeah,
it's the same thing with like EVs, right? Like, oh, batteries just need to get this cheap, and then EVs are going to be everywhere, and like batteries get close to the magic number, which is usually, I think, like $100 a kilowatt hour or whatever they say. But you're starting to run into the really hard nitty gritty of, wow, it takes, you got to mine lithium. That is an intensive process. It's hard to make it much cheaper than this. And so now they're just like cutting back on the amount of tech they put in each car. And like, obviously, these just came out. It might work fine. Like, they've got a fairly good safety record. I would say of all of the self-driving contenders, Waymo is the most serious, but
yes,
also
yeah,
like it illustrates kind of that their initial strategy of this will get cheaper is not really working as I think that they had hoped maybe it would.
Yeah, and I think there are two crises that will overtake the capacity to keep pursuing this. And we'll touch on this later, I'm sure. But like, the first one is I think the automotive industry, which is in a continuing and deepening crisis, as we're in a generation where people have less access to money to spend on cars, among many other challenges, material supply chain. The fact that the way that the entire ecosystem for building cars, the excellent episode, Trash Future episode you did recently explaining this, the ecosystem in which we have expected to build cars is on its way to no longer existing, which breaks the entire economic model of the current automotive industry.
Yeah.
I suspect priorities will just shift because there will be people very high up in the organization that say, what's the point of this again? Because it looks like it's not giving us what you said it was going to give us, which is a viable industry still. And I suspect priorities will shift.
Yeah, and if you go back to the Cybercab, the Tesla model.
The next one.
The supposed $25,000 two-seat taxi, which is just a baffling decision on many levels. To be like, yeah, you know what taxis need is fewer seats, actually. I think we should be able to put less people in the car.
Yeah, fewer people, and yet loads of space for the buggy. So yeah, I don't really know what's going on.
But this is kind of like the real underlying pitch here, which is we can lease you cars forever. It is the ultimate kind of dream of the American capitalist, which is it's going to be great passive income, bro.
Yeah.
It's just going to be you can sit back and your car will go earn your money, or ideally in Tesla's case, it will earn them money. We'll do lease deals with people where we, have their cars go out and drive while they're asleep at night. And then, they get used as taxis and come back. And then our car lessees will come, clean out their cars after a bunch of
I was going to say, which is fascinating because much as I'm a strong advocate for car sharing as a thing, right? But that is a complete opposition to the whole psychology of why most people have a car.
Yeah.
Or certainly why the people who can afford this type of prestige car.
I mean, it kind of speaks to the fact that there's just, if you're looking for areas for infinite growth and infinite return on investment, we're running out. I mean, like EVs, I did an episode of Well, There's Your Problem about this, about how EVs have largely struggled to transition from luxury good to everyday good. And it's mostly because, economies of scale just cannot help you at a certain point. You need to actually have people who have money to buy the cars. And also you just can't expect infinite growth forever. Like, I love EVs personally. I would love to buy in the US. Nissan Leafs are really cheap, right? That's kind of like our go-to used car. They have 40 miles of range left on some of the early ones because they didn't have battery temperature conditioning or anything like that. But they're really, really cheap. And the thing is like I can't charge it, so it's kind of useless for me. And that's that's the problem with great broader EV adoption in the States in a lot of cases.
Infrastructure's not there, and
exactly. So you're kind of like, well, what are we going to do next? It's like, well, the cars will go earn money for us. The robot will drive it around, and it will just all of the streets will be covered in cars that just independently earn money for us without any need for a human being.
And that's another thing we'll get to is like the fact that even if we assume that this does work. Because I haven't got to my second disaster that's the reason why they're not going to happen. But like, if we assume that they are going to work, like, well, let's not talk about what traffic levels will be if all of a sudden of these cars are moving rather than being, because most cars are stationary 95% of the time. Yeah. So what happens if they're moving 100% of the time? Let's not. So the second big disaster that will stop these in their tracks is climate change, because within the timescale of these potentially reaching the point of being realistic, other things might have shifted our priorities as a species. And because the radical futures stuff, which is happening, it's going to be happening in a decade that has a 2, a 0, and a 3 in it. We're not far away from the decade where the Mad Max shit happens. It's imminent, and our priorities will change. So the question, I put this horrible looking thing up because it's kind of the question, and we've touched on it quite a bit, which is why are we being told otherwise? In this practical reality of driverless cars being just this a thing that we will never reach to be universal, why are we being told otherwise? Why is this happening? And we'll in a moment we'll also talk about this and what's the real purpose behind it. But Victoria, why are the leadership of the automotive industry so keen to tell us that driverless cars, if there's no problem that driverless cars solve, why are we being told that they should exist? We know the answer behind the scenes is rentier economy shit, but why should we be believing this stuff? What's the reason that we are being told that these cars are going to exist?
I mean, in the US, you can get people kind of hyped for it in the same way that you can get people hyped for like Gen AI, right? Where it's kind of like, oh yeah, you can like outsource more of your life to like a personless, frictionless sphere that handles all of the things that make being alive. It'll make being alive. You have to interact with
the things
other
that
people,
define
or
what
like make
life is.
decisions,
Let's
or
get rid of those.
do undertake an activity. Like we'll handle that for you. And I think that I do think that a lot of it is, if you look at sort of the way that Musk has run Tesla, a lot of it is based off of we're going to hype a thing a long time before we're actually able to put it into practice, because that's kind of how we sort of get people. And of course, the thing is like, uncharitably and unofficially, I'd say a lot of it is how you kind of keep the stock price elevated. Like you're basically saying price in these future expectations when we have self-driving taxi fleets and we've captured the entire US market for all EVs. That's kind of the implicit promise of like, here's how we're going to make this much money, because that's the only way that you'd be able to make that much money. I guess like more of what you can actually say if you're a publication or an auto journalist is like, that's how you build excitement.
Yeah,
that's how you keep people hyped up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that is the crux of it, isn't it? Is that these companies are increasingly, the value of these companies is decreasingly reflective of their meaningful value.
Well,
and that bubble bursts if you don't keep hyping, right?
There are fewer people like. Overall, car sales are struggling. I mean, there was a bump from the pandemic because interest rates were nothing. But, overall car sales are struggling. The average age of a new car buyer is higher than it's ever been. Yeah. The average age of a car on U.S. roads is older than it's ever been because nobody can afford new stuff. Yeah. It's 13 years now. We are approaching a Cuba situation, honestly.
Hell yeah.
Where we've kind of driving around a bunch of old ratty Honda.
I mean, to be honest, I quite like that, actually. That's good for the environment, if nothing. Like it's embodied carbon is going down. Not necessarily great for tailpipe emissions, but
it's difficult because it's just we drive so much here. And the cars are, a lot of states don't actually have, in the UK you have like MOT, where it's like you actually have to inspect the car on a semi-reasonable basis, and like if it has serious problems, you have to get a new car or repair it. Most US states don't have that. Washington, where I live, once you buy a car, that's it. Nobody looks at it ever again for the rest of its life. You can be driving basically a frame with an engine, a seat, and a VIN plate, and you're fine. So there's other downstream externalities of that make it like it's better than if you were just making new cars all the time for people and it was just constant consumption. I don't think we necessarily need to go back to a 50s model where we're throwing away cars every 2 years. But it is kind of like a qualified success sort of situation.
Absolutely.
But and also like China is devouring us. China was supposed to be kind of where US automakers went for eternal sort of ever expanding horizons in terms of market and profit sales, and like that worked for a bit. Like Buick had really strong sales in China for a while because of like brand image that was started from like the pre-World War II era, but that's not real anymore. Like GM, Tesla, like they are not providing cars that are competitive in the Chinese market because Chinese automakers are vastly ahead of every Western automaker.
There's interesting, and we'll touch on the car industry's problems in the next sort of little mini segment, and this will neatly lead into it. But it's interesting to talk about China because there was an interesting little thread that was done by a journalist last year talking about the problems in the European automotive industry specifically, but these definitely apply across the pond as well in relation to the dominance of the advanced European and US automotive sector was the knowledge capital required to create an efficient modern engine. There's a lot of skills, a lot of decades of knowledge and R&D, and billions of dollars go into the development of the next engine. Specifically, the drivetrain is very valuable, which only works if you have an internal combustion engine car. Because as soon as you move to not that, the motor is cheap as fuck. Like it's just cheap. It doesn't matter. The expensive bit is batteries. And China went, oh, okay, yeah, we can see that coming. What we're going to do is dump multiple $1 trillion of investment money into battery technology. And they are wiping the floor with the rest of the planet on being at the head of the charge in battery technology
Yeah.
development.
Well, their cars are nicer too. I someday I worked with a Motor One who I respect greatly. Kevin Williams does a lot of reporting on EVs. He works for Inside EVs, and he has gone over to China repeatedly and gone to their car shows and like driven a bunch of like China only models rather that come from Chinese companies, and like he's like these things are so nice, and a lot of them cost a lot less than an equivalent
Well,
American or European car or even
yeah.
Japanese car at this point. And some of that is sure, like they've had some governmental support, but like the U.S. also subsidizes its automakers pretty heavily, and our cars are not as nice, so we're not getting the kind of return on investment they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a couple. Firstly, it's interesting that like there's the push for selling bigger and bigger cars, SUVs, certainly in the UK, is not something, much as some people say, well, that's what people want. No, it isn't. It's because automakers are getting rid of the Mondeo. They're getting rid of the cars that people would otherwise buy because the SUV, it costs the same basically to make a Super Mini as it does to make an SUV because the panel work that makes that car bigger is not expensive, but you've got to put all the same kit into the tiny car that you cannot charge much for. It's quite a basic and obvious equation, right? So the auto industry is obviously going to be pushing SUVs. Google Street View, and you just go to the like flick back a couple of screenshots to like 10 years ago, and the difference in the size of cars is dramatic. So that's one thing. And like, sorry, Victoria, go on. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just gonna say the U.S. environment too. Like, due to a very poor decision by the Obama era EPA, made it much easier for large vehicle SUVs and pickups to pass emissions laws here versus cars. They were judged much more punitively for being categorized as a car.
Yeah.
And so that actually kickstarted a lot of it, I think. We were kind of trending that way as it was, but post 2008, we could have had a reckoning about like car size, fuel efficiency, all that kind of stuff. And we just completely kicked that can down the road because the EPA was like, we're going to write a rule that is very beneficial to American automakers. And so that really kicked off sort of the crossover craze here. And I think that it's kind of led automakers to realize like, oh, we can charge more for a larger vehicle. And like, a lot of stuff is like getting a stripped down basic car is virtually impossible in the US. And there's some benefits to it, but if you just need a car and you don't have great credit or whatever, and you kind of need to go to a dealership and have like your parents co-sign or whatever that kind of thing, whatever shape that takes in the US, there is no affordable option anymore.
It's and the result of that is, again, coming back to China, is that you can. So I absolutely derailed myself because I was like, I just want to buy a Peugeot 105 that I can take to bits and put back together in a summer. That's what you want. That's the car. That's the car. The ideal of the car. So the Chinese story and the SUV story comes to a head in a car that I might end up being the next car I get because of the way our driving patterns have changed to favor an EV now rather than a secondhand petrol, which is the only kind of basically a reasonably affordable car that people actually want to buy that's an estate. It's an MG5. Sorry, so the MG5 SIAC motors. Yes, thank you, Victoria, for in the gap there where we listened to drilling, telling me the answer. It was making my edit nice and easy. No, that car is a car that people want to buy, and they are everywhere in the UK. They've just magically appeared everywhere, and they're not perfect, but they're quite nice looking. They're smart inside. I think they have issues with build quality on the roof rack, and there's something about the fact that it has a charger at the front, which is maybe not a great idea. But like, they're fine, and they're by far the most. They're an estate car, and that's what people kind of want. And they're just popping up absolutely everywhere. Fleet cars are just, and it's funny, and that's a Chinese car, and yep, they're just obliterating the kind of the European sort of the European competitors who are still trying to push SUVs.
They'll never let us have those here now. Like that. Donald Trump will personally destroy the entire U.S. economy before he allows a single Chinese car to drive around the U.S.
Yeah, and it's like how much longer can that actually sustainably last? So, right, while I miniaturize our faces while the drilling goes on in the background, and I love that that's happening. Honestly, Victoria, it's so much. I love that problems are being solved in your house as we speak. So,
I should clarify for your listeners, just in case you need to throw this in, but my building doesn't currently have water, and my tub is the problem. And that happened today and now.
So it's being solved. Everyone in the building will have water, hopefully within the recording time of this podcast. Fingers crossed. So like the European car industry, and I think the US car industry, for very similar reasons, although there are some differences, is in crisis. I think it's quite a reasonable description.
It's
Self-inflicted
not looking
crisis,
good.
but it ain't looking good. So this is where I go, well, what is this actually about? And I think you can kind of just dwell on this crisis. Like, it's a crisis. It's multifaceted, Victoria. But yeah, talk to us about your perceptions of this, both the US, but I dare say quite a lot about the European. In fact, there is a lot of crossover between the two, right? What is the car industry crisis going on?
Yeah, well, it's just the Chinese market is well handled by Chinese automakers, and that was over 1 billion people they were expecting to sell cars to, and that market's gone.
Yeah.
U.S. buyers and European buyers don't have money, and they can't afford to keep up demand because we destroyed the Fordist model of capitalism.
Yeah.
We replaced it with like Thatcher Reagan neoliberalism. Now nobody can afford to buy anything, and they're like, oh my god, who's going to buy cars? And so we need more revenue, and we've got to get it from somewhere. So we should invent a way to force something on people they don't want.
Yeah.
We've been leading to it the whole episode, but once again, the answer is late stage capitalism.
It's
the solution, of course,
is rentier economy shit. This is it. So the key thing that I wanted to talk about now, and this is right. Like,
that's
the
it.
world
There's
exists.
That's your podcast right there.
Yeah, well, it really is. This is a slide that I nicked back from a fantastic episode we did with Professor Thea Riofrancos, talking about mineral use relating to lithium specifically, but also, of course, within the book I talk about cobalt particularly, and I'm conscious that cobalt isn't necessarily in all modern batteries now. It is diversifying a bit.
There's
but
other ways that you can kind of go around it. A lot of automakers are trying to get off of it. China actually sits on a lot of the patents for batteries that don't use it because they were earlier, again, like you pointed out, they were better with, kind of capitalizing on battery tech early on. But even without that, there's still problems. Like,
it takes, and the thing about infinitely increasing the complexity of these vehicles, that Peugeot 107 reminder, these can be, the internal combustion engine vehicle, and indeed EVs, arguably even more so, can be simple and should be simple. They should do the thing that people need them to do. And have things like aircon and a radio, and there are things that make that experience nice, but they don't have to be infinitely complexifying and using all the minerals in the process. And so it's we have finite resources to build these things, and as you pointed out earlier, finite resources to power the data centers that will make the driverless rubbish work. Yeah.
And as a slight bit of optimism, which is unusual for me, but we have a startup in the US called Slate. That wants to sell like little mini pickup trucks, basically, like
the Slates. I do know about these.
They're not actually that small, but it is kind of like it's sort of an antidote to sort of the Cybertruck Hummer EV kind of mindset, where it's like we need bigger cars forever. And I am curious to see if that kind of catches on. I really think that I personally love like the Fiat 500e EV because it's like a little great city car. It's got like I think 200 miles of range. They're kind of expensive for what they are. They're like $30,000 in the US, which is like a lot for an EV with that little range. But they are kind of like perfect for most people's use cases. It's just kind of people can't afford to get a car like that because the people who would buy them, like me, live in apartments where the bathtub is being currently ripped out of the wall, and I don't have plugs outside to charge an EV with.
Yeah,
that's kind of the thing. Is like your buyer base for these like childless targeted sort of small city runabouts do not have the money for them. And so the only solution is just to keep building. The Hummer EV is kind of my poster child for the waste and excess of modern vehicles, but it's got 300 miles of range. It's got a battery that weighs as much as the MR2 on the cover of the book I shot.
Oh my God.
It's 2,800 pounds to the battery alone. Because they wouldn't even publish numbers. I think it was 180 kilowatt hours. But GM notably was so ashamed of this, they wouldn't tell you. It has the worst efficiency rating of like any vehicle ever sold with a battery going like in the modern era. Because it's just a statement piece.
Yeah, I was going to say, the people who buy those are the same vibe people who buy Cybertrucks. Like, they don't...
exactly.
The point
it
is
really was exactly that. It was a response to the Cybertruck. And both of them are really big and wasteful. Anyway.
Yeah, horrifying. So there's this whole we have a planet, we have limited resources. This is bad. So yeah, the point of this segment is the what's
There's
the
our
problem
problem.
segment, right? What's the problem? Well, there is your problem. Yeah, quite. Actually, I did inadvertently almost pick the W2IP colors there.
Yeah.
The other thing, of course, we've talked about this. Another theme. What problem is it solving? As I miniaturize our little faces. No, that's big faces. Well, there are our nice big faces. No, as I miniaturize our faces in top corner. Again, what problem are they solving? The point I make. Well, this is true for EVs as well. EVs are the future for cars, but they are, EVs are not the future of cars are not the future of transport. And this is whether it's fossil fuel, whether it's electric vehicles, or whether it's driverless cars. Well, actually, what's funny with the driverless cars is if you give them the benefit of the doubt of them actually potentially working, imagine this traffic situation, but worse. Because, as we said, the ideal model is all of the cars are driving at any given moment. So that just breaks our society. It just breaks it even more than cars already have. And we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, actually, that all of the and again, I very specifically talk about this in the book. The car-dependent society that the Western world has built since in the interwar and then post-war years is a major contributor to today's populism. The isolation that the car specifically has driven is the cause of a lot of the social and political problems we have today. And driverless cars will amplify that, right? They'll make it worse.
Like, you said it before that we recorded, but you were correct. It's like, oh yeah, let's take the one person you might talk to if you're like a wealthy person getting shuttled around, your cab driver, and just remove them from the equation too.
Yeah.
Everywhere I go, it should be a sterile bubble in which I only speak to other people in my class exclusively. I never want to interact with a person poorer than me ever again. Is kind of the underlying message of all of American society.
Yeah.
And that's like, and driverless cars are just kind of like a response to that. Whereas like, I take the bus and it works great. It's not self-driving. There is a bus driver on board who I do usually say thank you to.
Yeah.
And so I guess in that way, it's kind of less convenient than a driverless car where, the collective unconscious takes me to my destination. But like, it works really well. The bus drivers are usually really good at what they're doing. They can get through traffic really well. They don't get disabled by like a traffic cone like put on the hood of the bus. They like know how to navigate through jams. They're pretty good at avoiding cyclists. Shocking that like paying a person
and much cheaper than. Well, it's funny. There have been several driverless bus trials in the UK recently, and they're it's an even more laughable thing because there still has to be a driver in there because obviously there does, but it's again like it really exaggerates what problem is this solving. It's like this is solving no problem. You're making buses more impossible for local authorities to afford, and you're taking the device that you will never get a better computer that drives a vehicle than a driver who you've already got in the vehicle.
I mean, it's great if you're looking to do like a capital strike against kind of trained drivers who are in a union, and you can just get some person to sit there, and then you can send him to jail when the bus runs into somebody. Like kind of worked out with the Uber self-driving test here. But that's really like if you look at it from a human use perspective, it's not good for any living person that like isn't part of the ownership class.
No, and nobody's winning for this. And what's funny is that, as we've talked about earlier, the automotive industry isn't winning for the driverless car thing because it's costing them an arm and a leg. It's just baffling.
Yeah, no, well, I mean that's GM. It's just kind of like, we're done.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and so the other thing is like it's going to make our street space worse. This is an article from a while back that I talked about in RailNatter, which is Arup, which is a UK engineering consultancy. But they're if you like the like Apple of of engineering consultancies. Like they're the soft, touchy feely, like nice sort of they see themselves as the nice engineering consultancy, and they're talking about there's a couple of articles here, and they're talking about like changing street space to have like, well, we can illuminate the pavement and tell people where the pavement stops and the cars start, and it's like, oh, what you mean is just more space to choose where cars go, and also, by the way, a much less inclusive and accessible roadscape as well. So like it involves really what we're talking about is the potential. What I'm scared of is that even if driverless cars don't become a thing, which as we said they won't, that politicians try and out of embarrassment get in ahead of it and start reallocating yet more road space to cars.
They start ceding more and more of the public landscape.
Exactly. So that's
again, which we keep doing in the U.S. and it just keeps not being great.
Going well for us. So that's frustrating.
It's funny. In Seattle, and I think we're probably coming up on time, so I apologize.
Oh no, we're fine.
A local rant, but in Seattle we have our big kind of tourist location is the public square market. I think that's what they call it. actually gonna look it up so I don't sound like an idiot, because there's also a market called that Pike Place. I always do that. Pike Place Market. Public Square is in Cleveland, Ohio. I used to live there as a kid, and I have dyslexia, and I mix up those two places. Pike Place Market is kind of like the big tourist spot in Seattle, and it's sort of like a big outdoor shopping center, and like the fish market where they throw fish at people and stuff. It's fun. But there's like a road through the middle of it that cars have been driving on. And they recently shut it down for construction, and they turned it into a pedestrian-only zone. And everybody absolutely loves it. And there's like kids running around outside
Yes.
playing, and like everybody's like so much less stressed, and there's not like exhaust fumes. It's a huge boon for everybody's life, and there's so much pressure to be like, please leave it like this. It's so
Yes.
much better. And of course, it's going to be a battle because local politicians are like, we got to give it back to the cars. Like, the cars will be sad. I don't know. As somebody who has spent her whole life kind of like reviewing cars, like as an adult, it's shocking to me how much people want to shove them into every scenario where they are clearly not suited.
Yeah.
It seems bad. I don't know.
Yeah, and I wanted to end on, well, not quite end, because I want us to have a mildly upbeat, proper ending, but in this point of, like, the things that we face, the problems these will cause, I wanted to end on something that I've heard you speak really quite powerfully on, which is one of the worst insidious elements of this driverless car stuff is that it doesn't matter whether they work or don't. We've just put a whole load of sensors on a vehicle and are creating, what was that, 30 plus gig a minute of
34
data.
gig a minute.
And this, so I picked up this interesting article from the Mozilla website, actually, saying it's official, cars are the worst product category we have ever reviewed for privacy. The car brands we researched are terrible at privacy and security. So tell us a little bit about this push, because this is another chance for the automotive industry, where they're saying, well, if we can't make money off the cars, maybe we make money by doing what all the tech industry does, which is pivot to being a data sale, mining, and sales platform.
There's an article I did about 3 years ago at this point for The Drive, where I kind of tried to look into how much data cars collect on you. And this is before self-driving stuff. I mean, I was looking at, what you would term as legacy automakers. I think there was some specific data I found about Ford. There was some stuff I found from BMW, and I think it was Kia that I looked into. But basically, these cars are recording a lot of the places you go. How sometimes it records how quickly you're driving. It records whether you got in or out of the car. And a lot of this data is, especially if you have some sort of third-party app or even first-party app for like navigation or some sort of like connected Wi-Fi hotspot or whatever, it's transmitted back to the car company, and they use it internally for, as basically bulk telematics data to say like, oh, these cars went through failure events when they drove through like this tunnel. There must be, something weird about the grade of the road here. That's the original use case. But a lot of these companies will actually sell the data to third parties who use it as for like data brokerage stuff. And they will use it, they'll sell it on to whoever wants to pay for it. So in a way, ICE has paid for this data before. And it's like a way to get around even the concept of having to apply for a search warrant to be like, oh, this car goes across the border a lot. I wonder what's up with that.
Yeah.
And, basically bypass the court system to intrude on people's lives. It also, there was a case of this happening with cell phone data, with somebody who sought an abortion in Washington after they were living in Idaho, which is like not legal. And they went after somebody for going out of state and then coming back into the state to get that abortion. This was something that was theoretical when I wrote the story and is real now. That was cell phone data, but the same thing applies with cars. The other thing that's also worth noting is like Tesla's been a great example of sort of the privacy nightmare of all these constantly connected cars, especially with like, there's been a spate of kind of like vandalism cases as Musk has become publicly associated with the Trump admin. And, Teslas are basically always recording. They have cameras surrounding the whole car, which they use for, among other things, the self-driving system. Self-driving, I'm using air quotes, but what they refer to as FSD or autopilot or whatever, and they will record sometimes without the owner's knowledge or consent, and Tesla will sometimes forward that data on to other people, seemingly without. There's been instances in the past where Elon Musk got in an argument with an auto journalist about how one of the cars he tested was driven, because Musk went through and reviewed all the telematics logs from the car the journalist had, and so it's one of those things where it's like, theoretically they say they've got safeguards against it, but it's very difficult to verify.
But Musk, who by the way is like an extremely dangerous figurehead within the current fascist government in the US, Musk is able to just tactically just dive into that data at his own whim and pick out what he likes of it. Yeah, like
I'm pulling
absolutely.
up. I did a story about the it was
Well,
the
so there
moral
are things that you've talked about. So abortion was one. Is that the car can basically be like, oh, you're going to get an abortion. Let me just basically just directly ring the cops on you.
yeah.
Number two, for migrants, movement of people around is something that they can be like, as you say, ICE can just come in and do their thing. And of course, trans people, as the persecution of trans people increases across the US, it's like, oh, that's more data that they can just, pick people. It's
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and
it's
it's
frightening.
who, and it's also like who walked near this car,
Yeah.
who was like did if it's a political opponent of mine own a vehicle.
Yeah.
Like Tesla's are very Democrat heavy cars in the U.S. They had actually until
See also
recently
the picture that's
the
about to
most
appear.
left leaning buyer
Yeah.
base of any major
Yeah.
automaker.
I laughed that you said that on TF. It did tickle me. I mean, it's a kind of an obvious thing. Like, forget. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, but this is a lot of data that they don't really have. There's no laws really regarding it, except in California, where they have certain data privacy laws that really don't do enough to protect like consumers. So they kind of can do whatever they want with this. And for Tesla, a big part of their all of the camera feeds and stuff is that's how they're training
Yeah.
autopilot, right? It's
Yeah.
like they are relying on everybody who's driving to act as a beta driver to improve the software. And so it's like, that's core functionality that also can be used to like find political opponents. It's kind of bad.
Yeah, it's really quite frightening. Yeah, and we're gonna have to like as a tonic to that extremely depressing like why is this bad? Why is this bad? And why should we fight it? We need to talk about this picture.
Oh yeah,
just as a tonic to like
film
ending
camera
point.
in Seattle a lot, and this is a shot I saw, and it's not like the most artfully composed photograph, but it sure is funny, and that made it worth spending the film frame on.
It's quite a battered up looking Tesla actually. It's like
there are a lot of them. I mean, like Teslas are really big Uber cars here, which I think kind of like puts a neat little bow on all this.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of Model 3s that have pretty high mileage that get pretty heavily used that are kind of like the fleet Uber around here. Tesla's got some of I think their best market penetration like here in SF in the US. That people really love them up here, which has meant that, and of course Seattle is also like a very like Democrat leaning place.
Yes.
So I have seen so many variations of the "I bought this before he went crazy" sticker. It's,
yeah. This is like this is a Tesla, a Washington State Tesla, with a Kamala Harris. For the people sticker on the back. Yeah, it's quite something, and it's quite a battered and bruised looking Tesla, as I say, with another one part behind it actually, which is funny.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just a fun little vibe check, and you say it's a little bit of a button on it with the Teslas being commonly Uber used. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Right. Oh, what a delight, Victoria. We'll come back and have some brief closing words before and also do some pitching because you have things to sell to good people. Podcast only form. Hopefully this has been all right for all of you listening out in podcast land. It is available. Do leave a review if you enjoyed it, and it's available on all good podcasting platforms. So yeah, Rail Matter. The next up, the usual plugs. Everyone in the chat, hello. People who've been in the chat, they're not in the chat at the moment, Victoria, but they will be when this goes out because tomorrow night actually. So hello to all of you in the chat from last night. The chat continues ad infinitum on the Discord server, garethdennis.co.uk/discord, where you can have some fun. The merch is at garethdennis.co.uk/merch, which is good fun. And this is only possible, Rail Matters are only possible because of you, the Patreon supporters. No ads because of Patreon. So you get the warm fuzzy feeling for £1 or £2. But if you go into the £5 and above tier, that's right, we've kind of de-socialized. It used to be if you pay £1 or £40, you got the same thing. But that model needs updating just so we can do a bit more with the income. £5 gets you the bonus episode, which will be starting, I think, next month. Bonus episode after Rail Natter. More behind-the-scenes stuff, Q&A sessions, more good fun, and a free How the Rails Will Fix the Future audiobook. You get the audiobook for free if you join in the £5 and above tier, so that's exciting. The last plug from me before I talk about what's next episode is Wednesday the 4th of June and Wednesday the 10th of September. Book those talks, the two kind of live events that I'm doing coming up. So go and do that. That'll be fun. Well, I'll talk about the past and the future railways. You know all the links. I don't need to tell you. Look, it's my mustachioed face and the website telling you what the story is. But more importantly, Victoria, we need to talk about your book again because it's fab. It's gorgeous. It's a lovely little sequence of photos, a little article done about the launch event, which is really nice. But we have to talk about We Deserve This, a trans feminine automotive lookbook with a train in the picture on the front and an MR2, and one of your many friends who feature throughout the book. Which it's lovely. It's a delight for people. People should pick it up, buy it, own it. They can find it. Do you have a preference as to where they buy it, where they go to find it?
It's on sale through my publisher at Current Books. For international buyers, Amazon's probably the best bet because international shipping from here is kind of tricky at the moment.
Yeah, a bit messy.
And then for domestic buyers who want to go through their local bookstore, you can do it on bookshop.org.
Beautiful.
Which I highly recommend.
Yeah, nice.
I have Elliott Bay down the street from me, which is Seattle's and also the largest independent bookstore in America. They do not pay me to say this. I just love them.
The old free plug. Yeah, very nice. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Too right. And it's always nice to have support your indies. Yeah, I mean, like with my book, I tell people go to your local independent and they can just ask them to order it in, and they can probably do that. Like if you want to do it that way around. But also, yeah, bookshop.com basically is that the one where you can, because there's a similar in the UK where you basically you can order it, it arrives online, and you just basically allocate your bit of profit that goes to the indie bookshop that you choose.
Something like that, yeah.
Hive does that in the UK.
I think that's how you do. I think that's how you do it.
Yeah, which is really nice. It's really lovely. But yeah, go with that. And anything else, Victoria? Anything else you want to plug? Your website will be in the description.
I have a Patreon, and I will sometimes post musings and a lot of film photography. And that's kind of like it helps because I'm freelancing right now, and the US is kind of not great, so that's a little thing. If people are curious to see more of my photography, I've got a Patreon, but that's it.
Hell yeah,
fancy.
Do go and do that. And also, if people want more Victoria Scott, they can go back to, well, there's your Problem Podcast episodes, of course, where Victoria and I are in a vicious battle to the death, I suppose, of guest tally, but also Trash Feature episode appearances, which are there's some really good ones. Go back through Victoria's sort of back catalogue, some really good.
I've been in Trash Feature, I've been on there, I've been in Kill James Bond, I've been kind of in the Nova cinematic universe for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. The transporter. It was a fun. No, it wasn't. Wait a minute. Which episode did you? No, it wasn't.
I've done 2 episodes for Kill James Bond. The most recent was Gone in 60 Seconds.
Yes, it was Gone in 60 Seconds because it's not the remake. It was the recent. It was the Nick Cage one, not the original. Yeah. Okay, yes, that's which is good fun. Yeah.
And then you can just kind of spot me around. I do freelance work for a lot of automotive sites, and sometimes outside of automotive. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, the book is really the big thing. I'm hoping to have another one maybe within the next year or so, but it turns out books take a lot of work to write.
Yes,
so it might take me a minute.
I need a lot of water to go under the bridge before I start thinking about writing another book. Good grief. Next week, before we come back to Victoria for a proper heartfelt goodbye, next week, I think I will be making a lot of people extremely unhappy by going through the as yet very much not published and only alluded to in the press note about open access operator costs to incumbent train operators in the UK. So that is going to be spicy as hell. Will it get me sacked again? I hope not. No, it shouldn't do, because this is important journalism, and I'm not saying anything bad as an employee. But anyway, that's for me and my non-existent lawyers to worry about next week. More importantly, Victoria. Well, I'm just angling to get back onto WTYP again. Basically, that's so if I lose my job, that's where I end up. No, Victoria, what an absolute delight. It's been so lovely to have you on, but also extremely angering and insightful in equal measure. But we have to arm ourselves with the knowledge. That's how this all works. We're doomed to have knowledge on the left. That's the problem.
Well, I hope that it was helpful. I'm sorry that my bathtub was being deconstructed for the entire length of the episode, and apologies in advance to your editor for the power drill going through tile.
It'll work out. As I always have to say, the format of this is that it's real. We're very real on this podcast, by which I mean janky as hell and loving it. Victoria, what an absolute delight. I will wave vigorously. But to everyone in the chat, thank you so much for joining us. Any questions that come up in the YouTube chat that I like, I can fling to Victoria, and we can pop answers of that in the Discord if there's anything particularly interesting.
That's great.
Before I get RSI, I shall say farewell. Victoria, thank you so much. Cheerio!
That's really. I'm so sorry.
You don't have to apologize. It's fine. We'll just wait a minute until it's finished.
SAIC motor is actually the answer.
SIS, that's the one. Yeah. There we are.
I think he's done now.
So